The bazaars of ancient Samarkand buzz with activity as merchants from distant lands haggle over precious goods. Silk from China catches the morning light, while spices from India fill the air with exotic aromas. Persian carpets lie spread across wooden stalls, and Byzantine gold coins change hands with practiced ease. This scene, repeated countless times across centuries, represents one of humanity's greatest achievements in trade and cultural exchange. Tonight, we'll journey along the legendary Silk Road, the ancient superhighway that connected East and West for more than 1,000 years. We'll discover how a network of trade routes transformed civilizations, spread religions, and created the first truly global economy. So just relax and let your mind drift as we explore the sleepy history of the Silk Road. When we imagine the Silk Road today, we might picture caravans of camels trudging across endless deserts, their bells jingling in the wind as they carry treasures between distant empires. This romantic image captures something essential about these ancient trade routes, but the reality was far more complex and fascinating than any single picture could convey. The Silk Road wasn't actually a single road at all, but rather a vast network of interconnected pathways that stretched across continents, linking the Mediterranean world with the Far East. The origins of this remarkable trading system can be traced back more than 2,000 years, to a time when the great civilizations of antiquity were beginning to reach beyond their borders in search of exotic goods and new opportunities. In China, the Han Dynasty was consolidating its power and expanding westward. In the Mediterranean, the Roman Empire was growing in strength and influence. Between these two mighty civilizations lay a vast expanse of mountains, deserts, and steppes, populated by nomadic tribes and small kingdoms that would soon become crucial links in the chain of commerce. The story begins in earnest during the 2nd century before the Common Era, when a Chinese diplomat named Zhang Qian embarked on what would become one of history's most consequential journeys. Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty had dispatched Zhang Qian on a diplomatic mission to forge alliances with Western tribes against their common enemies, the Xiongnu nomads who threatened China's borders. Zhang Qian's expedition, which lasted more than a decade, would have far-reaching consequences that no one could have anticipated at the time. During his travels, Zhang Qian encountered the magnificent Fergana horses of Central Asia, creatures so superior to Chinese breeds that they became known as heavenly horses. He also discovered thriving civilizations in places like Bactria and Sogdiana, regions rich in gold, precious stones, and exotic goods unknown in China. Perhaps most importantly, he learned of the great appetite these Western peoples had for Chinese silk, a fabric so prized that it was literally worth its weight in gold. When Zhang Qian finally returned to the Han court, his reports opened the emperor's eyes to the vast possibilities that lay beyond China's traditional boundaries. The Chinese had long been aware that their silk was valuable, but Zhang Qian's accounts revealed just how desperately it was desired by foreign peoples. This knowledge would prove to be the foundation upon which the entire Silk Road trading system would be built. The Chinese jealously guarded the secrets of silk production for centuries, making it one of the most closely held trade secrets in history. The process of cultivating silkworms and harvesting their cocoons to create the lustrous fabric was known only to the Chinese, giving them an effective monopoly on one of the ancient world's most coveted luxury goods. Anyone caught smuggling silkworm eggs or revealing the secrets of silk production faced death, a testament to just how valuable this knowledge was considered to be. As demand for Chinese silk grew throughout the Western world, merchants and traders began to establish regular routes between East and West. These early traders were pioneers, willing to risk their lives crossing treacherous mountain passes and hostile territories in pursuit of profit. The journeys were long and dangerous, often taking months or even years to complete. Merchants had to contend with bandits, extreme weather, difficult terrain, and the constant threat of political instability in the regions through which they traveled. Yet the potential rewards were enormous. A bolt of silk that might cost a few coins in China could be sold for hundreds of times its original price in Rome or Constantinople. Similarly, goods flowing eastward from the Mediterranean world could command astronomical prices in Chinese markets. Gold, silver, precious stones, spices, perfumes, and exotic animals all found eager buyers along the Silk Road, creating opportunities for immense wealth for those brave enough to undertake the journey. The development of the Silk Road was greatly facilitated by the rise of powerful empires that could provide security and infrastructure along key segments of the route. The Parthian Empire, which controlled much of modern-day Iran and Iraq, became a crucial intermediary in east-west trade. The Parthians established way stations and provided protection for merchant caravans, taking their cut of the profits in the form of taxes and customs duties. Similarly, the Kushan Empire, which dominated parts of Central Asia and northern India, played a vital role in facilitating trade between different regions. The Kushans were particularly skilled at managing the complex logistics of long-distance trade, establishing standardized weights and measures, and creating a stable currency that was accepted across their territory. Their coins, featuring both Greek and Indian influences, became a common medium of exchange along many Silk Road routes. The Romans, too, became increasingly involved in Silk Road trade as their empire expanded eastward. Roman merchants established trading posts in India and even ventured as far as China itself. Roman gold coins have been found in archaeological sites across Asia, testament to the reach of their commercial activities. The Romans developed such an appetite for silk that it became a significant drain on the empire's gold reserves, leading some emperors to issue edicts attempting to limit silk imports. As trade along the Silk Road intensified, permanent settlements began to spring up at key points along the route. These oasis towns and mountain passes became thriving commercial centers, attracting merchants, craftsmen, and service providers from across the known world. Cities like Palmyra in Syria, Merv in Turkmenistan, and Kashgar in western China grew wealthy by providing essential services to traveling merchants. These Silk Road cities developed their own unique cultures, blending influences from the many different peoples who passed through their gates. Palmyra, for example, became a cosmopolitan hub where Roman, Persian, and Arab cultures mingled freely. The city's merchants grew so wealthy that they built magnificent temples and palaces that rivaled those of the greatest imperial capitals. Similarly, cities along the Central Asian portion of the Silk Road became melting pots where Chinese, Persian, Indian, and nomadic cultures intersected and influenced one another. The flow of goods along the Silk Road was accompanied by an equally important exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. Buddhism, which originated in India, spread eastward along the trade routes to China, Korea, and Japan, carried by missionary monks who traveled with merchant caravans. The religion found fertile ground in the cosmopolitan Silk Road cities, where tolerance for different beliefs was often a practical necessity for conducting business with diverse trading partners. Christianity, too, spread along the Silk Road, reaching as far east as China by the 7th century. Nestorian Christians established communities in many Silk Road cities, building churches and monasteries that served both local converts and traveling merchants. The famous Nestorian stele, discovered in China, provides evidence of the remarkable reach of Christian missionary activity along these ancient trade routes. The exchange of technological knowledge was equally significant. The Chinese invention of paper, which revolutionized communication and record-keeping, spread westward along the Silk Road. The technique of papermaking reached the Islamic world by the 8th century and eventually made its way to Europe, where it would play a crucial role in the development of European civilization role in the development of printing and the spread of literacy. Similarly, the compass, gunpowder, and printing technology all spread from China to the West via Silk Road connections. In the opposite direction, mathematical concepts like the decimal system and astronomical knowledge flowed from the Islamic world and India into China. The cross-pollination of ideas and technologies that occurred along the Silk Road contributed immeasurably to human progress and innovation. The cuisine of Silk Road regions also reflects this remarkable cultural exchange. Spices that originated in India and Southeast Asia became integral to Persian and Central Asian cooking. Chinese tea culture spread westward, while winemaking techniques traveled eastward from the Mediterranean. Noodles, which may have originated in China, found their way to Italy via Silk Road connections, though the exact route and timing of this culinary migration remains a subject of scholarly debate. The linguistic impact of Silk Road trade was profound as well. Sogdian, the language of skilled Central Asian merchants, became a lingua franca along much of the route, serving as a common tongue for traders from different linguistic backgrounds. Persian, Arabic, and Chinese also served as important commercial languages in different regions, and the need for translation and interpretation gave rise to a class of multilingual professionals who facilitated communication between diverse trading partners. The political implications of Silk Road trade were enormous. The wealth generated by controlling key segments of the route became a source of power for various kingdoms and empires. Rulers competed fiercely for control of strategic mountain passes, oasis towns, and river crossings that could generate substantial customs revenues. The rise and fall of many Central Asian dynasties can be directly linked to their ability to control and profit from Silk Road commerce. The Sassanid Empire in Persia, for example, grew wealthy by taxing goods that passed through their territory between the Roman and Chinese worlds. They used this wealth to build magnificent cities, support large armies, and patronize art and literature. When the Sassanids were eventually conquered by Arab forces in the 7th century, control of these lucrative trade routes passed to the emerging Islamic caliphates, contributing to their rapid expansion and consolidation of power. As we continue our exploration of this ancient superhighway, we'll discover how the Silk Road's influence extended far beyond mere commerce, shaping the development of entire civilizations and leaving an indelible mark on human history that can still be felt today. The golden age of Silk Road trade reached its zenith during the Tang dynasty in China, roughly from the 7th to the 10th centuries of the Common Era. This period represented the pinnacle of cultural exchange and commercial activity along the ancient routes, when the network functioned with remarkable efficiency and sophistication. The Tang emperors actively promoted trade with foreign lands, viewing it not only as a source of wealth, but as a symbol of their empire's prestige and reach. During this era, the Chinese capital of Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an, became one of the largest cities in the world, with a population exceeding 1 million inhabitants. The city's western market was a microcosm of the entire Silk Road network, where merchants from across Eurasia gathered to trade their wares. Persian carpets were displayed alongside Indian jewels, while Central Asian horses stood tethered next to stalls selling Byzantine glass and Arab perfumes. The diversity of goods and peoples in Chang'an's markets rivaled that of any modern international hub. The Tang period also witnessed the emergence of sophisticated financial instruments that made long-distance trade more practical and secure. Chinese merchants developed a system of paper credit notes called feiqian, or flying cash, which allowed traders to deposit money in one city and withdraw the equivalent value in another, eliminating the need to transport heavy coins across dangerous terrain. This innovation represented one of the earliest forms of banking and would later influence similar developments in the Islamic world and medieval Europe. The cosmopolitan nature of Tang China is perhaps best exemplified by the city of Dunhuang, located at a crucial junction where the northern and southern branches of the Silk Road converged. Dunhuang became a melting pot of cultures, religions, and artistic traditions. The famous Mogao caves, carved into nearby cliffs, contain thousands of Buddhist murals and manuscripts that reflect influences from China, India, Central Asia, and even the distant Mediterranean world. These artistic treasures provide a vivid window into the multicultural society that flourished along the Silk Road during its golden age. The prosperity of the Tang period attracted merchants from increasingly distant lands. Arab and Persian traders established permanent communities in Chinese cities, building mosques and maintaining their own customs while adapting to local conditions. Jewish merchants from Mesopotamia also ventured eastward, establishing trading networks that stretched from Baghdad to Beijing. These foreign communities served as crucial bridges between different cultural worlds, facilitating not only commercial exchanges, but also the transmission of knowledge, artistic styles, and religious ideas. The Islamic world played an increasingly important role in Silk Road trade, as Arab armies conquered vast territories across the Middle East, Central Asia, and the Far East Asia and North Africa during the 7th and 8th centuries. The new Islamic empires inherited and expanded upon existing trade networks, bringing their own innovations to the system. Islamic merchants developed sophisticated commercial practices, including detailed contracts, partnership agreements, and insurance schemes that reduced the risks associated with long-distance trade. The city of Baghdad, founded as the Abbasid capital in the 8th century, became a major hub for Silk Road commerce. Located strategically between the Mediterranean world and Central Asia, Baghdad attracted merchants, scholars, and craftsmen from across the known world. The city's House of Wisdom became a center for translating and preserving ancient texts, ensuring that Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge would be transmitted to future generations and eventually reach Europe through various channels. Central Asian cities experienced unprecedented growth and prosperity during this period. Samarkand emerged as one of the most important commercial centers along the entire network, its markets filled with goods from China, India, Persia, and the Byzantine Empire. The city's craftsmen became renowned for their skill in working with silk, producing textiles that were prized throughout the medieval world. Samarkand's paper mills, established after Chinese prisoners of war, revealed paper-making secrets following the Battle of Talas in 751, supplied much of the Islamic world with this revolutionary writing material. The northern routes through the steppes also flourished during this period, facilitated by the rise of the Turkic Khaganate and later Turkic successor states. These nomadic empires provided security for merchant caravans crossing the grasslands and collected substantial revenues from customs duties. The relationship between nomadic rulers and settled merchants was often symbiotic, with the nomads providing protection and the merchants bringing wealth and luxury goods that enhanced the prestige of nomadic courts. Women played significant roles in Silk Road trade, though their contributions are often overlooked in traditional histories. In some Central Asian societies, women actively participated in commercial activities, managing family businesses while their husbands traveled. Chinese sources mention foreign female merchants who traveled to China, while archaeological evidence from Silk Road sites reveals grave goods that suggest women of substantial wealth and status in trading communities. The technological innovations that emerged from Silk Road interactions during this period were remarkable. The technique of block printing, developed in China, began to spread westward through Buddhist monasteries and trading networks. Mathematical concepts from India, including the decimal system and sophisticated astronomical calculations, reached both China and the Islamic world via Silk Road connections. The astrolabe, an instrument for navigation and astronomical observation, was refined through the collaborative efforts of scholars from different traditions who encountered each other in Silk Road cities. Agricultural exchanges also transformed the regions connected by the Silk Road. New crops spread along the trade routes, diversifying local diets and agricultural systems. Grapes and winemaking techniques traveled eastward from the Mediterranean, while Chinese innovations in rice cultivation influenced agricultural practices in Central Asia and beyond. The famous Fergana horses that had so impressed Zhang Qian centuries earlier continued to be prized throughout the medieval period, with breeding programs established in various regions to maintain and improve these valuable animals. The influence of Silk Road trade on artistic expression was profound and lasting. The distinctive artistic style known as Gandhara art, which emerged in the border regions between the Indian subcontinent and Central Asia, reflects the fusion of Greek, Persian, and Indian influences. Buddhist sculpture from this period shows clear traces of Hellenistic artistic traditions, while Chinese ceramics began to incorporate Persian and Central Asian decorative motifs. Textile patterns traveled along with the goods themselves, creating a shared visual vocabulary that spanned continents. Music and dance also traveled along the Silk Road, with Chinese court records describing foreign musical instruments and performance styles that arrived with visiting merchants and diplomats. The Chinese pipa, a four-stringed lute, may have originated from similar instruments used in Central Asia and Persia. Dance forms from Central Asia became popular in Chinese imperial courts, while Chinese musical traditions influenced performance practices across the network. The period also saw the development of increasingly sophisticated diplomatic practices as various empires and kingdoms sought to maintain the stability necessary for profitable trade. Elaborate gift exchanges between rulers served both diplomatic and commercial purposes, with exotic goods serving as symbols of power and prestige. Chinese emperors sent silk and porcelain as diplomatic gifts, while receiving horses, precious stones, and exotic animals in return. These ceremonial exchanges often preceded or accompanied more substantial commercial relationships. The religious landscape of Silk Road regions became increasingly diverse and complex during this golden age. While Buddhism continued to spread eastward and Christianity moved in both directions, new religious movements also emerged from the cultural mixing that characterized Silk Road cities. Manichaeism, founded by the Persian prophet Mani in the 3rd century, found followers across Central Asia and even reached China, where it influenced local religious practices. The syncretic nature of many Silk Road religions reflects the cosmopolitan environment in which they developed. The prosperity and cultural flowering of the Silk Road's golden age would not last forever, however. Political changes, natural disasters, and shifting trade patterns would eventually transform and sometimes disrupt the ancient network, leading to new configurations of power and commerce that would reshape the medieval world in ways that few could have anticipated. The decline of the Silk Road's golden age began gradually, like the slow fading of a magnificent sunset. By the 11th century, a combination of political upheavals, environmental changes, and shifting economic conditions had begun to undermine the stability that had made large-scale overland trade possible. The collapse of the Tang dynasty in 907 marked the end of an era as China retreated inward and the unified imperial system that had facilitated trade fragmented into competing regional kingdoms. The rise of new powers in Central Asia brought both opportunities and challenges to the ancient trade network. The Seljuk Turks emerged as a dominant force across much of the Middle East and Central Asia, establishing an empire that stretched from Anatolia to the borders of China. While the Seljuks initially maintained and even expanded trade routes, their frequent conflicts with neighboring powers created an atmosphere of uncertainty that made merchants increasingly wary of long-distance journeys. Climate change also played a crucial role in the transformation of Silk Road trade during this period. Archaeological evidence suggests that Central Asia experienced a gradual cooling and drying trend beginning around the 10th century, making some traditional routes more difficult to traverse. Oasis towns that had thrived for centuries found their water sources diminishing, forcing populations to relocate or adapt to harsher conditions. The great city of Merv, once a jewel of the Silk Road, began to decline as changing environmental conditions made it harder to sustain its large population. The Crusades, beginning in the late 11th century, paradoxically both disrupted and stimulated Silk Road trade. While the military campaigns created instability in some regions, they also increased European awareness of Eastern goods and technologies. Crusading knights returned home with tales of magnificent silks, exotic spices, and advanced craftsmanship they had encountered in the East, fueling demand for these luxury items among European nobility. Italian merchants, particularly from the maritime republics of Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, began to play an increasingly important role in connecting European markets with Silk Road goods. These enterprising traders established permanent trading posts in Constantinople, Alexandria, and other Eastern Mediterranean ports, creating new links between the overland routes and European consumers. The wealth generated by this trade transformed Italian cities into centers of commerce and eventually helped fund the cultural flowering of the Renaissance. The Mongol conquests of the 13th century brought dramatic changes to the Silk Road network, initially devastating many trading centers, but ultimately creating new opportunities for commerce. Genghis Khan and his successors established the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. Under Mongol rule, the Silk Road experienced what historians sometimes call the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative peace and security that facilitated unprecedented levels of trade and cultural exchange. The Mongols actively promoted commerce, viewing trade as a source of wealth and power for their empire. they established a sophisticated postal system called the Yam, which provided fresh horses and supplies at regular intervals along major routes, dramatically reducing travel times for both merchants and official messengers. This system enabled information to travel faster than ever before, allowing merchants to respond quickly to changing market conditions and political developments. Under Mongol protection, European merchants ventured further east than ever before. The Polo family's famous journeys, including those of Marco Polo, were made possible by the stability and security provided by Mongol rule. Marco Polo's detailed accounts of his travels, though sometimes embellished, provided Europeans with their most comprehensive view yet of the wealth and sophistication of Eastern civilizations. His descriptions of Chinese cities, Indian spices, and Central Asian customs fired European imaginations and helped sustain interest in Eastern trade. The Mongol period also witnessed remarkable technological and cultural exchanges. Chinese innovations like gunpowder and the magnetic compass spread rapidly westward through Mongol territories, eventually reaching Europe, where they would have revolutionary impacts on warfare and navigation. Persian and Islamic astronomical knowledge traveled eastward, contributing to advances in Chinese science and mathematics. The Mongols themselves, originally nomadic herders, became patrons of art and learning, establishing libraries and academies in their major cities. However, the Mongol Empire's unity proved temporary. By the late 13th century, the vast empire had fragmented into separate khanates that often fought amongst themselves. This political fragmentation gradually undermined the security that had made long-distance trade flourishing under unified Mongol rule. Merchants once again faced the challenges of crossing multiple political boundaries, each with its own taxes, regulations, and potential for conflict. The rise of the Ottoman Empire in the 14th and 15th centuries created new dynamics for Silk Road trade. The Ottomans gained control of crucial routes between Europe and Asia, including the strategic Bosphorus Strait and much of Anatolia. While they continued to facilitate trade, the Ottomans imposed substantial taxes on goods passing through their territory, making overland routes increasingly expensive for European merchants. Meanwhile, the Ming dynasty in China, established in 1368, initially adopted policies that were less favorable to foreign trade than those of their predecessors. The new Chinese rulers were suspicious of foreign influences and preferred to focus on internal development rather than external commerce. While trade continued, it was more restricted and regulated than during the cosmopolitan Tang period. The most significant challenge to traditional Silk Road trade came from an unexpected direction: the sea. Portuguese navigators, driven by the desire to bypass Ottoman-controlled land routes, began exploring oceanic passages to Asia. Vasco da Gama's successful voyage around Africa to India in 1498 demonstrated that maritime routes could provide faster, cheaper, and more direct access to Asian markets than the traditional overland paths. The development of oceanic trade routes gradually shifted the center of global commerce from the continental interiors to coastal ports. Cities like Lisbon, Amsterdam, and London emerged as new centers of international trade, while traditional Silk Road cities found themselves increasingly marginalized. The Portuguese, followed by the Dutch, English, and French, established trading posts and colonies along Asian coasts, creating maritime networks that competed directly with overland routes. Yet the decline of the traditional Silk Road was not immediate or complete. Regional trade continued along segments of the ancient network, serving local markets and maintaining some of the cultural connections that had developed over centuries. Central Asian cities adapted to changing conditions, focusing more on regional commerce and developing new specializations. Bukhara became renowned for its carpets and metalwork, while Samarkand maintained its reputation for fine textiles and craftsmanship. The Safavid Empire in Persia, established in the early 16th century, made determined efforts to revive and control Silk Road trade. The Safavids invested heavily in infrastructure, building caravanserais and maintaining roads to attract merchants. They also engaged in diplomatic efforts to secure favorable trading arrangements with both European powers and Eastern kingdoms. For a time, these efforts achieved considerable success, with Persian silk becoming highly prized in European markets. Religious conflicts also played a role in reshaping trade patterns during this period. The rivalry between Sunni Ottoman and Shia Safavid empires created political tensions that sometimes disrupted traditional routes. Merchants had to navigate not only physical dangers, but also religious and political sensitivities as they moved between territories controlled by rival powers. The introduction of new crops from the Americas, facilitated by Spanish and Portuguese colonial networks, began to transform agriculture across Silk Road regions. Crops like maize, potatoes, and tomatoes gradually spread eastward, diversifying local food systems and supporting larger populations. These agricultural changes had long-term implications for trade patterns and economic development throughout Eurasia. Despite these challenges and transformations, the Silk Road's legacy as a conduit for cultural exchange persisted. Ideas, artistic styles, and technologies continued to flow along traditional routes, even as the volume of commercial trade declined. Islamic scholars in Central Asian cities maintained intellectual connections with their counterparts in Baghdad, Cairo, and Istanbul, while Buddhist monasteries continued to serve as centers for religious and cultural transmission. The story of the Silk Road's transformation reveals the dynamic nature of global trade networks and the complex interplay of political, economic, technological, and environmental factors that shape human connections across vast distances. As we continue to explore this ancient superhighway, we'll discover how its influence extended into the modern era and continues to shape our understanding of global interconnectedness today. The transformation of the Silk Road during the early modern period reflected broader changes sweeping across the Eurasian continent. As European maritime powers established their dominance over oceanic trade routes, the ancient overland networks adapted rather than simply disappeared. Local merchants and regional rulers found new ways to maintain profitable commerce, even as the grand transcontinental caravans of earlier centuries became increasingly rare. The Mughal Empire in India emerged as a significant player in this transformed landscape during the 16th and 17th centuries. Under rulers like Akbar and Shah Jahan, the Mughals controlled vast territories that included crucial segments of traditional Silk Road routes. The empire's wealth, derived partly from controlling trade between Central Asia and the Indian Ocean, enabled the construction of magnificent monuments like the Taj Mahal, which itself incorporated architectural elements and decorative techniques that had traveled along ancient trade paths. Mughal courts became centers of cultural synthesis, where Persian administrative traditions mixed with Indian artistic styles and Islamic architectural principles. The empire's workshops produced textiles, metalwork, and precious objects that found markets across Asia and increasingly in Europe through both overland and maritime networks. The famous Mughal carpets, woven with techniques learned from Persian masters, became prized possessions in European palaces and wealthy merchant homes. The Russian Empire's expansion southward and eastward during this period created new dynamics for Silk Road trade. As Russian forces pushed into Siberia and Central Asia, they encountered established trading networks and sought to integrate them into their growing empire. The Russians established new trading posts and fortified towns along traditional routes, creating hybrid systems that combined elements of the ancient Silk Road with emerging Russian commercial practices. Russian merchants, many of them from merchant families in cities like Moscow and Novgorod, began venturing into Central Asian markets with increasing frequency. They brought furs, amber, and European manufactured goods, exchanging them for silk, spices, and precious stones. These Russian traders often worked closely with local merchants who possessed intimate knowledge of regional conditions and established relationships with suppliers and customers. The city of Astrakhan, located at the mouth of the Volga River, became a crucial hub where Russian, Persian, Central Asian, and increasingly European trading interests converged. Markets in Astrakhan featured goods that had traveled thousands of miles, from Chinese porcelain to Indian cotton, from Persian silk to Russian furs. The city's cosmopolitan atmosphere reflected the continuing vitality of transcontinental trade connections, even as political control shifted between different empires. Chinese policies toward foreign trade underwent significant changes during the Qing dynasty, established by Manchu conquerors in 1644. Initially, The new rulers maintained many Ming restrictions on foreign commerce, but gradually they began to recognize the economic benefits of controlled international trade. The Qing established specific ports and border crossings where foreign merchants could conduct business under Chinese supervision, creating regulated channels for the ancient exchange of goods and ideas. The famous Qiakta trade, conducted between Chinese and Russian merchants at the border between Mongolia and Siberia, exemplified these new arrangements. This carefully regulated commerce allowed for the exchange of Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain for Russian furs, silver, and European goods. The Qiakta market became one of the most important trading centers in Asia, handling goods worth millions of silver rubles annually and maintaining connections that stretched from London to Beijing. Central Asian Khanates, including Bukhara, Khiva, and Kokand, adapted to changing circumstances by developing specialized roles within regional trading networks. Bukhara became renowned for its banking services, with Bukharan merchants establishing financial connections that stretched from Istanbul to India. These merchants developed sophisticated credit systems that allowed for complex international transactions without the physical movement of precious metals across dangerous territories. The cultural implications of these transformed trading relationships were profound. Persian remained the diplomatic and commercial language across much of Central Asia, but Russian, Arabic, and Turkic languages also served important functions in different regions. The need for translation and cultural mediation created opportunities for individuals who could navigate between different linguistic and cultural worlds. Educational institutions in Silk Road cities adapted to serve these evolving needs. Madrasas in cities like Bukhara and Samarkand continued to teach traditional Islamic subjects, but also incorporated practical skills needed for international commerce. Students learned accounting methods, foreign languages, and legal principles that would serve them in careers as merchants, diplomats, or administrators. The artistic traditions of Silk Road regions continued to evolve through contact with new influences. Persian miniature painting incorporated European perspective techniques learned through contact with European traders and diplomats. Central Asian metalwork began to reflect Russian decorative styles, while maintaining traditional techniques passed down through generations of craftsmen. These artistic fusions created distinctive regional styles that reflected the complex cultural interactions of the early modern period. Women's roles in Silk Road societies varied considerably across different regions and communities, but many women continued to play important economic functions. In some Central Asian cities, women managed family businesses while their husbands traveled, maintaining commercial relationships and overseeing local operations. Jewish and Armenian merchant families, which had established extensive trading networks across Eurasia, often relied on women to maintain household economies and social connections that supported broader commercial activities. The dietary habits of Silk Road populations continued to reflect the region's role as a crossroads of cultures. Tea culture, which had spread westward from China over previous centuries, became deeply embedded in Central Asian and Persian societies. The elaborate tea ceremonies and customs that developed in different regions reflected local adaptations of Chinese traditions. Similarly, the use of spices in regional cuisines continued to demonstrate historical connections with Indian and Southeast Asian trading networks. Religious practices along the Silk Road during this period reflected centuries of cultural mixing, while also responding to new political pressures. Islamic communities maintained connections with religious centers in Mecca, Damascus, and Istanbul, but also developed distinctive local traditions that incorporated elements from pre-Islamic beliefs and practices. Buddhist communities in some regions maintained contacts with monasteries in Tibet and Mongolia, preserving ancient manuscripts and artistic traditions. The gradual decline of overland trade did not mean the disappearance of intellectual exchange along traditional Silk Road routes. Scholars continued to travel between cities, carrying manuscripts, scientific instruments, and mathematical knowledge. The observatory in Samarkand, built during the 15th century, continued to attract astronomers and mathematicians from across the Islamic world, maintaining traditions of scientific inquiry that had characterized Silk Road cities for centuries. Medical knowledge also continued to flow along ancient routes, as physicians trained in different traditions encountered each other in cosmopolitan trading centers. Chinese medical practices, including acupuncture and herbal remedies, spread westward through trading connections, while Islamic and European medical texts traveled eastward. This exchange contributed to the development of synthetic medical traditions that combined elements from multiple healing systems. The technological innovations that emerged from Silk Road interactions during the early modern period were often adaptations of existing techniques rather than revolutionary breakthroughs. Improvements in metallurgy, textile production, and transportation reflected the accumulated knowledge of centuries of cross-cultural contact. Local craftsmen continued to refine traditional techniques while incorporating new materials and methods encountered through trading relationships. As European colonial powers extended their influence into Asia during the 17th and 18th centuries, they often sought to co-opt or control existing trading networks rather than replace them entirely. The British East India Company, for example, established relationships with Central Asian merchants who could provide access to markets beyond direct European control. These arrangements created hybrid commercial systems that combined European capital and organization with traditional Asian trading expertise. The French also sought to establish influence in Central Asian trade, particularly through diplomatic missions and commercial agreements with regional rulers. French merchants and diplomats traveled traditional Silk Road routes, establishing contacts and gathering intelligence about commercial opportunities. Their reports back to European capitals provided detailed descriptions of cities, markets, and trading practices that had evolved over centuries of international commerce. As we approach the modern era, the ancient Silk Road's transformation reflects humanity's endless capacity for adaptation and innovation in the face of changing circumstances. The network that had once carried silk and spices across continents would continue to evolve, finding new forms and purposes while maintaining its essential character as a bridge between different worlds and cultures. The 18th and 19th centuries brought unprecedented challenges to the ancient Silk Road network, as global commerce underwent revolutionary changes that would Europe, created reshape international trade forever. The Industrial Revolution, beginning in Britain and spreading across new manufacturing capabilities that transformed the very nature of goods flowing between East and West. Steam-powered machinery could now produce textiles farrants of hand-woven silk and cotton more efficiently than traditional craftsmen, challenging the centuries-old domain from Asian workshops. European factories began producing machine-made textiles that could compete with traditional Asian products on both price and quality. Manchester cotton mills churned out vast quantities of cloth that found markets across the globe, while Birmingham metalworks produced tools and hardware that rivaled the finest craftsmanship of Damascus or Samarkand. These industrial products traveled to Asian markets via both maritime and overland routes, fundamentally altering the balance of trade that had characterized Silk Road commerce for millennia. The construction of railways across the Russian Empire during the 19th century created entirely new possibilities for transcontinental transport. The Trans-Siberian Railway, completed in the early 20th century, provided a direct rail connection between European Russia and the Pacific coast, offering unprecedented speed and reliability for moving goods between Europe and East Asia. This iron highway could transport cargo in weeks rather than the months required by traditional caravans, revolutionizing the economics of overland trade. Chinese tea, which had become enormously popular in European markets, found new pathways to Western consumers through these railway connections. Russian merchants established tea trading companies that imported Chinese tea through border crossings in Siberia and Central Asia, then transported it via rail to European markets. This trade became so significant that entire Russian cities specialized in tea processing and distribution, creating new economic centers along the railway routes. The Great Game, the strategic rivalry between the British and Russian empires in Central Asia, profoundly affected traditional Silk Road regions during the 19th century. Both empires sought to extend their influence over the strategically important territories of Afghanistan, Turkestan, and Tibet, viewing control of these regions as crucial to their broader imperial ambitions. This competition brought European military technology and administrative systems to areas that had been governed by traditional methods for centuries. British officials and military officers advancing northward from India, established political relationships with Afghan and Central Asian rulers, offering military support and financial incentives in exchange for exclusive trading privileges and political influence. Simultaneously, Russian forces moved southward from Siberia, incorporating Central Asian commodities into their empire through a combination of military conquest and diplomatic negotiation. These imperial expansions disrupted traditional trading relationships while creating new opportunities for those who could navigate the changing political landscape. Archaeological expeditions during this period began to reveal the remarkable history of Silk Road civilizations to European scholars and the broader public. Explorers like Aurel Stein and Paul Pelliot conducted systematic excavations at sites like Dunhuang and Turfan, uncovering thousands of manuscripts, artworks, and artifacts that provided unprecedented insights into the daily lives of ancient Silk Road inhabitants. These discoveries captured public imagination in Europe and America, inspiring romantic notions about the exotic Orient and the adventurous merchants who had traversed these ancient routes. The manuscripts discovered in Central Asian caves and ruins revealed the incredible linguistic diversity that had characterized Silk Road societies. Documents written in dozens of languages, from Chinese and Sanskrit to Persian and Arabic, demonstrated the cosmopolitan nature of these ancient trading communities. Scholars working to decipher these texts uncovered evidence of religious practices, commercial agreements, and cultural exchanges that had taken place centuries earlier, providing a detailed picture of how the ancient network had actually functioned. Photography, invented in the mid-19th century, began to document Silk Road cities and landscapes for the first time. European and American photographers ventured into Central Asia, capturing images of ancient monuments, bustling bazaars, and traditional craftsmen at work. These photographs provided Western audiences with their first realistic glimpses of places that had previously existed only in travelers' descriptions and artistic imaginations. The visual documentation also preserved records of architectural and cultural traditions that would soon face unprecedented pressures from modernization. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 provided yet another alternative to traditional overland routes, making maritime transport between Europe and Asia even more efficient and economical. Ships could now reach Asian ports without the lengthy journey around Africa, further reducing the competitive advantages of overland trade. This development accelerated the decline of traditional caravan routes, while simultaneously increasing the volume of goods flowing between continents through maritime channels. Telegraph lines, strung across continents during the late 19th century, revolutionized communication along traditional Silk Road routes. Messages that had once taken months to traverse the distance between London and Beijing could now be transmitted in hours. This communication revolution enabled more sophisticated coordination of international commerce, while also facilitating diplomatic and military communications between distant imperial capitals. The telegraph lines often followed ancient trading routes, creating modern networks that paralleled the paths taken by merchants and pilgrims centuries earlier. Local rulers in Central Asian cities attempted to modernize their territories to compete with the changing global economy. The Emir of Bukhara imported European advisors to help establish modern educational institutions and administrative systems. Similarly, the Khan of Khiva sought to introduce new agricultural techniques and manufacturing processes that might enable his territory to participate more effectively in international commerce. These modernization efforts met with varying degrees of success, often encountering resistance from traditional elites who feared losing their established privileges and authority. The discovery of oil in various regions along traditional Silk Road routes began to create new forms of economic value that would eventually rival the historical importance of silk and spices. Petroleum resources in Persia, Central Asia, and the Caucasus attracted international attention and investment, leading to the construction of pipelines and refineries that created entirely new patterns of economic activity. These developments foreshadowed the resource-based economics that would characterize much of the 20th century. Christian missionary activities intensified during this period, as various European and American religious organizations established schools, hospitals, and churches in Central Asian cities. These institutions provided modern medical care and education, while also attempting to convert local populations to Christianity. The cultural impact of these missionary efforts was complex, introducing new ideas and technologies, while also creating tensions with established religious traditions and practices. Traditional crafts and industries along the Silk Road faced unprecedented competition from machine-made European products. Silk weavers in Chinese cities found their markets undermined by cheaper European textiles, while metalworkers in Damascus and Isfahan struggled to compete with factory-produced goods. Some craftsmen adapted by specializing in luxury items that appealed to collectors and connoisseurs, while others abandoned traditional trades entirely in favor of new occupations created by modernization. The development of standardized weights, measures, and currency systems across different empires began to simplify international commerce, reducing some of the complexities that had characterized traditional Silk Road trading. Russian rubles, British pounds, and other imperial currencies became accepted mediums of exchange in regions where local coinages had previously dominated. These monetary changes reflected the growing integration of regional economies into global systems centered in European capitals. Educational reforms in various Silk Road regions began to introduce European languages and scientific knowledge alongside traditional subjects. Students in madrasas and other schools started learning Russian, English, or French as practical skills needed for engaging with the modern world. Mathematics, geography, and natural sciences based on European models supplemented traditional curricula, creating new generations of local leaders who could navigate between traditional and modern systems of knowledge. The construction of roads suitable for wheeled vehicles gradually began to supplement or replace traditional caravan routes designed for pack animals. These improved transportation networks enabled the movement of heavier goods and larger quantities of merchandise, while also facilitating the deployment of military forces and administrative personnel across vast territories. Road building became a symbol of modernization and imperial control, demonstrating the power of new technologies to transform ancient landscapes. As the 19th century drew to a close, the ancient Silk Road had been fundamentally transformed by the forces of industrialization, imperial expansion, and technological innovation. Yet the essential human desire for connection, exchange, and discovery that had originally created these networks continued to manifest itself in new forms, ensuring that the spirit of the Silk Road would persist, even as its physical manifestations evolved, to meet the demands of a rapidly changing world. The 20th century dawned with the ancient Silk Road facing an uncertain future, its traditional patterns of commerce and cultural exchange challenged by forces that would have been unimaginable to the merchants who once traveled these routes with their caravans of camels and horses. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 created massive disruptions across Eurasia, as imperial armies clashed along borders that had once facilitated peaceful trade. Railways that had been built to carry goods were now commandeered to transport soldiers and military supplies, while traditional trading relationships were severed by the demands of wartime nationalism. The Russian Revolution of 1917 brought dramatic changes to vast portions of the former Silk Road network. The Bolsheviks who seized power in Moscow viewed traditional trading relationships with suspicion, seeing them as remnants of capitalist exploitation that had no place in their new socialist society. Central Asian territories that had maintained semi-autonomous status under Tsarist rule found themselves incorporated into a centralized Soviet system that prioritized industrial development over traditional commerce. Soviet planners approached Central Asia with ambitious schemes for transformation, viewing the region primarily as a source of raw materials for industrial centers in European Russia. Cotton cultivation was expanded dramatically across Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, while mining operations extracted minerals and metals needed for Soviet factories. These economic policies created new forms of prosperity for some communities, while disrupting traditional ways of life that had persisted for centuries. The establishment of the Soviet Union created new borders and restrictions that fragmented ancient trading networks. Merchants who had once moved freely between cities now faced passport controls, customs barriers, and ideological scrutiny from officials suspicious of foreign contacts. The cosmopolitan atmosphere that had characterized many Silk Road cities gave way to more controlled environments where international connections were viewed with official skepticism. Meanwhile, the collapse of the Chinese imperial system and the subsequent period of warlord conflicts created instability in the eastern portions of the ancient network. Chinese merchants and craftsmen faced uncertain political conditions that made long-distance trade increasingly workshops that had produced silk, sky, and unprofitable. The traditional porcelain and other luxury goods struggled to maintain their operations amid political chaos and economic disruption. The interwar period saw various attempts to revive transcontinental trade through new technologies and organizational methods. Aviation began to offer possibilities for rapid transport across the vast distances that had once required months of overland travel. Pioneer aviators established air routes that connected European cities with destinations in Central Asia and China, carrying mail, passengers, and high-value cargo across traditional Silk Road territories. Commercial aviation companies competed to establish the fastest and most reliable connections between East and West, creating new forms of international prestige and competition. The romance of flight captured public imagination, much as the ancient caravan routes had once fired the dreams of merchants and adventurers. Passengers who flew these routes often described the experience of soaring over ancient cities and trading centers, gaining aerial perspectives on landscapes that had witnessed centuries of human movement and exchange. The Second World War brought even greater disruptions to Silk Road regions, as major powers fought for control of strategic resources and transportation corridors. The famous Burma Road became a crucial supply line for Chinese forces fighting Japanese invasion, while the Persian corridor served as a vital route for Allied supplies reaching the Soviet Union. These wartime logistics operations demonstrated the continuing strategic importance of transcontinental connections, even as they bore little resemblance to traditional commercial networks. Post-war reconstruction efforts in various countries along traditional Silk Road routes reflected different national priorities and ideological commitments. The newly established People's Republic of China initially focused on internal development and self-reliance, limiting foreign trade and cultural exchange. Soviet Central Asian republics were integrated more thoroughly into the planned economy system, with production targets set by Moscow planners who had limited understanding of local conditions and traditions. The Cold War created new barriers to international cooperation and exchange along traditional Silk Road routes. Ideological competition between capitalist and communist systems meant that connections between different regions were often viewed through the lens of strategic rivalry rather than mutual benefit. Cultural exchanges that had once flowed freely were now subject to political approval and official oversight. Yet despite these obstacles, some forms of connection and exchange persisted through unofficial channels. Academic scholars maintained contacts with colleagues in different countries, sharing research and preserving knowledge of ancient traditions. Artists and writers found ways to communicate across political boundaries, creating works that reflected the cosmopolitan heritage of Silk Road civilizations. Traditional crafts and cultural practices continued in modified forms, adapting to new political and economic realities while maintaining connections to ancient roots. The ancient Silk Road may have faded from its former glory, but its spirit lives on in our modern interconnected world. From fiber optic cables carrying digital information across continents to international airports bustling with travelers from every corner of the globe, we continue to seek the same connections that drove those early merchants across treacherous mountain passes and endless deserts. Today's global economy, with its complex networks of trade and cultural exchange, remains fundamentally rooted in the pioneering vision of those who first dared to bridge the vast distances between East and West, creating humanity's first truly international community along the ancient Superhighway.